Just a brief update on the J.K. Rowling saga that's exploded over the last day or two over on X, where you'll find me at the handle dshensmith. I'll link myself below. If you're not familiar with all those tweets and what's happening, I'll also link my video of yesterday in the description below as well. But the update is not only is Police Scotland not recording all of J.K. Rowling's tweets as a hate crime, but they are not recording them as a non-crime hate incident either. Now, many people might not know what that is. Essentially, what that means is if someone reports something to Police Scotland believing it to be a hate crime, which would be right if there were a hate crime and they needed to report it, there is a facility for someone to do that. Now, if somebody, this is what it is, if somebody believes that they are being targeted either by virtue of their disability, race, religion, sexual orientation, transgender identity, if it is a crime that is in respect of any of those, which could amount to some kind of assault, verbal abuse, damage to property, threatening behaviour, robbery, harassment, or any other online sort of abuse, then any of those things that relate to those characteristics could be a hate crime. But what Police Scotland say is that if it is not deemed to be a crime, they will still record it as a non-crime hate incident. Their website still says this to the time of recording this, because I checked. They say if you report a crime and they deem it not to be a crime, well, first of all, they say we will listen to you, your report will be investigated, and we will offer you victim support. So unequivocally offering investigation for every report, which is just not feasible, because just not long ago it was reported that Police Scotland had admitted that they just do not have the resources to investigate every crime. Much like every other police force around the country, they have to prioritise which offences they look at, which are the most serious, which they can prioritise by way of evidence that they could follow through to a successful detection, they call it, a detection of crime. I.e. they find the culprits and they can bring charges. Nonetheless, they say on the website, still to this moment in time, that they will investigate every report of an offence that includes one of these things. It goes on to say, you will be contacted by an officer, either by phone, in person, or by your preferred method of contact. Again, promising a drain on the resources. Now, in many cases, it will obviously be correct that the person is contacted by phone, in person, or by another method of contact. But then it goes on. If Police Scotland has enough evidence, the person responsible will be charged with the offence and reported to the Crown Office and Procurator Fiscal Service. However, if there's not enough evidence, we will still record your report as a hate incident and offer you support. And then goes on, you'll be kept updated on the progress of any case. Now, this has called into question a lot of different things, and there is also a tangent with regard to sport, which I'll come back to in a moment, not directly related to this particular bit, but related to the overall discussion. Now, this has obviously raised the concern with some very prominent lawyers over on X that the police database is going to result in inconsistent reports, in that some things will be stored and some things not, and there'll be an inconsistency. And as I've pointed out over on X, consistency is an absolute key fundamental principle of any fair justice system. The laws and the procedures and the justice system itself should all be applied fairly and equally. And if some things are recorded against some individuals, whereas the same types of incidents are not recorded against another individual, then that would not be consistent, that would not be fair. And there might be all sorts of other implications as well, such as holding data against people when it's not consistent with their own policies, for example. So there's arguments by prominent lawyers over on X today that this database should be wiped clean and essentially start afresh with a new framework and a new approach to this policy. And I would respectfully suggest that the website might need to be updated as well, because I think it's quite a lofty claim that every incident, every report will be investigated and recorded, regardless of whether there is a crime or evidence to support such an investigation and charge. And so ultimately, I would agree. I think that database needs to be wiped. It needs to start again. It needs to have a fresh pair of eyes look at what this policy is supposed to do, how it's supposed to work, and indeed what this database is supposed to be all about. Now, There's two tangents actually, one of which is on freedom of expression versus freedom of speech. Interchangeable terms, if you will. Now, the freedom of expression under Article 10 ECHR, given rise as one of our human rights, it is not an unfettered right. In other words, it can be interfered with, it can be curtailed if there is justification for doing so. Clearly, it would not be good law to allow anyone to say anything if it amounts to abhorrent abuse of another person. Clearly, that would be wrong, and that's what the law is there to prevent. However, there's a misunderstanding or a disconnect between the freedom of expression and free speech or freedom of speech in some people's eyes. But actually, they are sort of all-encompassing in that freedom of expression incorporates freedom of speech. In fact, judges have referred to it as such and said that it is not just the ideas and the information that is imparted and the opinions that are imparted, but the way in which they do so and the manner in which that they choose to express those views and opinions. And so that the very expression of those ideas and views and opinions altogether encompasses speech. So freedom of expression encompasses free speech. And in the UK, we have laws that very strongly protect the right to the freedom of expression and freedom of speech. And thus, it needs to cross a very high threshold, a very high bar before it becomes something that is oppressive and unacceptable. Whereas you may retain the right to offend and alarm, and somebody may find things that you say distasteful. They might strongly disagree with your ideas and opinions, however you've expressed them. There is a boundary, and certain cases have decided where that boundary is. For example, without going into graphic detail, because people don't really like that, in one particular case, photographs were sent by a person to a particular type of establishment. The photographs were fairly grotesque, and obviously the recipient was alarmed and distressed beyond that which was considered reasonable, and the court agreed. That crossed the boundary of what was the freedom of expression by sending those photographs, just by way of example. The final tangent, before I leave you for this brief update video, there's been a discussion on sport and the exclusion of transgender individuals in certain categories of sport and things of that nature. Now, obviously, I can't speak for the world in this video as to what the law is around the world. It changes not just country to country, but in federal jurisdictions, for example, the United States, federal law and state law, etc., it varies so widely. But what I can talk about is the Equality Act 2010, the UK's piece of legislation for maintaining equality. People have the wrong impression sometimes that that means that there is absolutely no way, under any circumstances, can anybody discriminate on any of the protected characteristics. But there is a distinction in words. What it really means is you cannot unlawfully discriminate on any of those protected characteristics. So, for example, one classic example is where an organization is trying to improve its diversity statistics within the workforce and therefore might offer a job position particularly targeting a specific group. That is not discriminatory against the others to whom it is not marketing this position. It is a legitimate aim, a legitimate purpose, and it's a proportionate means of doing so. Coming back to sports, there are guidance and explanatory notes that accompany parts of the Equality Act, and one of which says that a person under the sports section explanation does not contravene this act so far as relating to sex only by doing anything in relation to the participation of another as a competitor in a gender-affected activity. And a person does not contravene these sections so far as relating to gender reassignment only by doing anything in relation to participation of a transsexual person as a competitor in a gender-affected activity if it is necessary to do so to secure in relation to the activity, fair competition, or the safety of competitors. And in considering such, the gender-affected activity is a sport, game, or other activity of a competitive nature in circumstances in which the physical strength, stamina, or physique of average persons of one sex would put them at a disadvantage compared to average persons of the other sex as competitors in events involving the activity. Now, I can personally say, having trained in martial arts for well over 30 years now, I've fought countless men and countless women. And it would be too simplistic to say the men are stronger than women. That is absolutely not the case. As an example, to be fairly blunt about it, I have fought some men over the years that are fairly lightweight and short, as against some women that were fairly tall, fairly muscular, broad and strong, and could quite easily match any other man that I've ever fought. So it would be far too simplistic to say men versus women, etc. It has to be decided as a fair competition, as a fair assessment of the situation. And so if an organisation were to take a decision based on fair competition or based on the safety of competitors, based on all of those characteristics, and justify why it is proportionate and necessary to do so, then it would not be discriminatory and not in contravention of the Equality Act 2010 in that regard. So I hope that clears up some confusion, because some people seem to think that there is absolutely no way of legitimizing any discrimination on these protected characteristics. Now, of course, unlawful discrimination is, as it suggests, unlawful and is to be avoided. But there are situations that can be and should be justified. So I hope that is useful. You can find the Equality Act by Googling it. Find my previous videos linked below. Please do make sure you like this video and subscribe. I thank you all for subscribing. I see my subscriber count growing as you grow interest in my videos. So thank you for watching. Have a great evening, and I'll see you next time.